Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week through news and headlines ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and your co-host today, straight from the Exiles Network, is Millenial Mike.
Good to hear from you. Good to see you. And happy to be here. Let's get into this stuff.
We have a lot of movie news today especially, but if this is your very first episode, the way we format the show is we go through a block of news, and then we end it with the Brokehead block, which is what Millenial Mike and I have been doing since you last heard us. So let's jump right in and explore sector number 520. Sylvester Stallone is not too happy about this first one, Millenial. The Wrap revealed that the Creed spinoff Drago is now in the works for MGM. So screenwriter Robert Lawton is set to pen the Drago script, which is expected to follow Ivan and Victor. Stallone took to Instagram to vent his frustrations about this news, saying, quote, "Another heartbreaker. Just found this out. Once again, this pathetic 94-year-old producer and his moronic, useless vulture children, Charles and David, are once again picking clean the bones of another wonderful character I created without even telling me. I apologize to the fans. I never wanted Rocky characters to be exploited by these parasites. By the way, I once had nothing but respect for Dolph, and he never told me about what was going on behind my back with the character I created for him. Real friends are more precious than gold," end quote. So what do you think about this, Millennial Mike? He is really putting it out there.
Well, recently I heard that he was having some difficulty procuring the rights for the franchise. I didn't really research it in its entirety, in its nuance and its specificity, but I heard about that. So I'm guessing that this is something to do with that. And also I know that MGM wasn't MGM the one that was acquired by Amazon as well? Because, yes. And actually it's funny because you were asking me if there was some news that we should cover just before the podcast, and I just now realized it. Tomb Raider also had something to do with the whole MGM buyout, Lara Croft and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, when these big shifts happen and people are losing their roles, I mean, especially with this, Stallone had an attachment to this for such a long time, and it's an iconic character. I can imagine how he'd be frustrated. I just wonder why he never got full ownership to begin with. But
he's not even listed, I believe, as a producer or any involvement in it. Creed 3 is set to release November of this year, and that's another one that he is not involved in at all. So this is what he was referring to by saying another, that once again is what he highlighted on there by that same producer. So he did not want Creed 3 to happen, doesn't want Drago to happen, had to be convinced to even do a first Creed movie. The director came up to him with the idea and the story, and that's where it kind of took off. But in this case, it sounds like MGM can do whatever they want with that Rocky universe, and they don't feel like they need to include the character, at least. Obviously, he doesn't want to do the movie. He's not going to be in the movie. So I'm assuming they're going to focus on Drago and probably have a cameo or a supporting role for Creed in there. But I'm kind of, now that I'm learning all these backgrounds to it, and especially since Sly is not involved, that completely killed my enthusiasm to watch Creed 3 or even this news for Drago.
So I actually haven't, I probably watched the original Rocky movies when I was quite young. I never really went back to them and watched them intentionally as an older person. So it's been a while, and I don't really have a updated view of the franchise. I heard the Creed movies were quite good. People seem to really like those. I believe the guy who does Fruitvale Station also does that. And also does Black Panther. I forget the guy's name. The director who does that.
Coogler. But, I think it was something Coogler.
Coogler. Is this Drago movie gonna be directed by him as well?
I don't believe so, no. And I don't think he even directed Creed 3 either. Unless they threw enough money at him. Because I know at one point there was that question of whether he was going to come back for the third one. And I think that was the big deal, that he wasn't going to write and direct the third Creed.
So I guess, Stallone, was he both the writer and director of all the original the original Rocky movies, or in what way, aside from being the director or the actor, I'm sorry, probably the producer of those movies, what other kinds of...
He was definitely, at the very least, a co-writer. I think in a few of the movies he had a secondary writer on there, but he was the head guy when it came to the story. He ended up directing Rocky 6 and Rocky 5 as well, and Rocky 4. But I think it might have been a couple of other guys that directed the very early ones. So he was very much involved in a lot of these. And then Creed 1,
Gotcha,
he helped with the writing on that one too.
Yeah, well, I do kind of have a positive opinion of Stallone. He seems like a cool guy, so it does kind of frustrate me that he's going through this at the moment. But it's not the first time that someone's artistic creation has been snatched up from underneath them, so it doesn't all too much surprise me anymore. But
I did ask on Twitter what you thought of this news, and got a tweet from @L_Gapi_the_Siam, who said, quote, "I was never into the Rocky franchise, but I saw Dolph's latest IG post. He said that there isn't even an approved script, and that he was under the impression that Stallone was involved, which isn't the case. Stallone doesn't like the idea from what I read in his IG post," end quote. So with all of that out there, it sounds like fans of the franchise are catching wind of this and seem to be on the same boat as Sylvester of, if that's not really his story anymore, then maybe they're like me where I don't really want to see it, because it almost seems like in the Terminator sequels where some of those Cameron doesn't consider the sequels canon or whatever. So I think that's what's kind of may happen with Rocky at some point.
Like Dark Fate. Yeah, I mean, it's personally, I have never been like really interested in the Rocky franchise. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe one day I'll watch them. And if I do, I might compel me to also watch this Drago movie or whatnot. I don't quite have the same attachment to the franchise as perhaps you do. So it doesn't really, I don't really feel one way or the other about it. But no, there's a lot of situations where the original team is not attached to it anymore, and that kind of sucks my excitement away from it. Mostly just because I know that the team doesn't have the same good faith and goodwill for the franchise as the original team did. There's a lot of situations where a new team will pick up something and I'll give them a shot, but sometimes you kind of just know that they're almost trying to undermine the franchise itself and change what it stood for and use it for their own purposes, in which case that's always quite nefarious. I hate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the Netflix Avatar, The Last Airbender thing recently with the creators leaving. And
yeah, Scott's all bent out of shape about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm personally not. I don't mind. Honestly, I did enjoy the original Avatar. This is a little bit off topic, so I won't go too much into it, but I actually really like the idea of where they're wanting to take it. They want to take it into a more adult, more serious tone. And I'm completely okay with that, because the thing about the original show is I didn't like the childishness of it. Going back and looking at it now, it just feels like a childish Saturday morning cartoon with some deeper themes at times. So it's like with that, it's like, yeah, sure. Like if you want to, update it a little bit in that way. But if they make other changes, that could still frustrate me. But I'm not like totally put off by that.
You had mentioned earlier that Tomb Raider is going to feature a change as well, and maybe it's speculated that it's part of the Amazon buyout. But what were you able to find on the new Lara Croft?
Yeah, so this was actually pretty recent news. My friend actually sent this to me today, and this article actually came out yesterday. But they were kind of in a development state where they had not... They basically had a date kind of set, but they hadn't had any real progress made on it. They were still kind of in talks. And basically after the Amazon purchase of MGM happened, talks of the new movie broke down. So this article here from The Verge says that the new Tomb Raider film will have a new Lara Croft. Of course, it doesn't actually say in the article if there will be a new Tomb Raider film, when there'll be a new Tomb Raider film. It's kind of clickbaity in that way. Basically, what happened is that Alicia Vikander, who played Tomb Raider in the 2018 reboot, is no longer attached to the project anymore. So they could technically pick her back up and create a sequel to that if they wanted to. but they are no longer officially continuing with the last movie. So there's no reason to expect it. If they wanted to reboot it again, they could, which is kind of frustrating for me because I did like Alicia Vikander as Tomb Raider. I did enjoy the 2018 Tomb Raider reboot. In general, I think it would behoove them to stick with it because they can build from where they left off and keep the familiarity that they do have. And it didn't have like it did pretty well. I think it made its money back, maybe made a little bit of money, not much or anything really. But I think that she did a really good job, and I would like to continue to see her. What did you think about the movie?
I did like it. I liked her portrayal in it as well, and I watched it in Illinois when I was visiting my friends, and I remember being really sleep deprived. I can't recall what we had done or what we were doing that day, or it might have been the same day I flew in. So I was kind of nodding off towards the end of it, but I did enjoy most of the film from what I was able to catch, which was most of it. I don't remember sleeping through any huge chunks of it. I almost thought that there was a sequel already, but I think maybe there had been talks about it for a while, and then so far we haven't gotten that sequel. It's just that 2018 one, right?
Yeah, correct. I think that the movie could probably have used a little bit bigger budget, my personal opinion. But I think they did okay with the budget that they had. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty boilerplate action adventure movie. But I will say that the movie in general did look more exciting than, for instance, the Uncharted movie.
Oh yeah,
it looked way better than that. It didn't seem. I don't know. I really can't. Maybe in a lot of ways it looked kind of the same. It just very like they go to an island, they're looking for a treasure. There's like another archaeologist or another like adventure explorer whose incentives are conflicting with the protagonists, and they kind of clash or whatever. But I think that they did a pretty good job with the 2018 one. So we'll have to see. I mean, like I said, they still could hire Vikander back and make a sequel to it, but any talks that they did have has fallen apart, and they're no longer obligated to the contract that Alicia had. So we'll see.
If anything, we could always revisit those old ones with Angelina Jolie, yeah, and her dad, who's in the first one. So
right,
and Daniel Craig. We always used to laugh at the comic shop. We would play that on Netflix in the store, and all I could hear was audio because I had down working and all of that. But when Daniel Craig would speak, and this was right before he landed the Bond role in Casino Royale, it was literally like 1 or 2 projects before that, and he just has this American accent that he enunciates so hard when he speaks. He's trying really hard to do the American accent, and it's really bizarre because you see him and there's like a counting portion where he's counting down, and he's like 8, 9, 10, and he's like, all right, dude. He's like super American, yeah.
That's funny.
Something that we would not have gotten were it not for the Xbox, which does feature the Tomb Raider games. I love Xbox, always have. The creator of Microsoft's Xbox, Seamus Blackley, revealed via Twitter that he developed a pitch for a video game known as Jurassic World, which did eventually become the 2015 film. So this was based less on the theme park aspect and more of dinosaurs and humans having to learn to coexist. Steven Spielberg apparently loved the idea, and after the team began realizing the game and hiring developers, there were changes in leadership at Universal, which then led to the game turning into the film, the first film in this current franchise of Jurassic World movies. And I thought that was pretty cool because you don't too often see it where a game gets canceled and turned into a movie instead.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jurassic World movie is based on a video game because it's very theme parkish, and it's not from the standpoint of the story of the original one, which is literally based on well, see here, the last one was an island. The new one, I'm sorry, is a theme park. So yes, it was based on a theme park. The new one is based on a theme park. I'm sorry, but it even more so, the movie felt like it was just kind of one event to the next, and you're kind of just going through this experience. I didn't really care so much about the story. It felt very MCU-esque in that way, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Especially like that one scene that everyone talks about, the woman is being attacked by like the pterodactyls, and she's being thrown around, and the camera's doing all these like loop de loops and stuff. She's like, woo! She's like flying around, and it's completely surreal. It's like, am I supposed to be like serious with this, or like, I don't get what's going on with this? That really took me out of it too. So I never ended up watching the second or third one in the Jurassic World franchise, but I don't know. And then to hear like, oh, this is a game about humans and dinosaurs trying to coexist. I know the second one was supposed to have taken like a kind of like an environmentalist angle on the whole dinosaur situation, which that sounds like complete rubbish to me. It's like environmentalism can go straight out the window with dinosaurs. Like if there are dinosaurs running around the streets, then you can extinct them again.
Yeah, they touch on that too. Yeah.
That didn't really win me over.
And in the sequel, they make Bryce Dallas Howard's character, who was the theme park director, basically from the first one, they make her one of those environmentalists. And it's just kind of funny how her character took this complete 180, where not even in the first one was there any hint of her like saying, well, these dinosaurs should be saved or anything like that. She was hired to do a job, and she was the director of the theme park, and that was it. At the end, she helps out Owen to take down the Indominus Rex. And then all of a sudden, she's running around with that kid from, I forgot his name, Justice something, but he's from Detective Pikachu. And he's also an environment. Yeah, and then the girl that plays Faye in the Cowboy Bebop show, she's the other environmentalist as well. And they're running around, and that is kind of the theme. And it's touched on again in the third one. But yeah, some of the characters do bring up, I think it was Jeff Goldblum or someone, that these dinosaurs don't belong here anyway, but they're already a part of us, so we have to learn to live with them. That's kind of the message by the end of it.
That's ridiculous. I mean, they're dinosaurs. It's not. So, I mean, a video game, like, that's why I'd say a video game like this would be better as a theme park, where you're trying to build a theme park and you're whatever. You have certain metrics that you're trying to meet, but they should have honestly stuck to their roots with the kind of the thriller aspect of the original movie in the new ones, instead of trying to do this big like action blockbuster story with the modern environmentalist slant or whatever, because it's just it's ridiculous. I really like the idea that the enemy is the dinosaur. The dinosaur is your enemy. Like, you are going to get eaten, you're less powerful than them, and you will go extinct if you don't do something about it. And honestly, I kind of like the idea that you're not even thinking about the larger situation, because you're just trying to get out of the immediate situation where the raptors are around the corner or the T-Rex is sniffing you out. Like, that's much more compelling than, free the dinos.
Well, I do hope that Seamus Blackley got some kind of payout for this idea that Steven Spielberg then took and went and pitched something. I don't know how the specifics of how that worked, but the way that Seamus was talking about it on Twitter, it seemed pretty positive. So I'm assuming he got some kind of payout, even if he's not listed in the credits, or he doesn't want to stir the pot too much. But that's just personally what I hope. We did get the Russo brothers. We don't often get Russo brothers news here on the show for certain reasons, but now I think it's the second time in the last 3 episodes that they're brought up here on the show. In a recent interview with Vanity Fair, the Russo brothers addressed the critique of Civil War, in which it relies heavily on gray and muted colors, and the airport scene is brought up all the time. And so one of the brothers, Joe Russo, argued, quote, "This movie is brutalist in tone. It's meant to be devoid of color. The whole idea behind it was all these characters were slipping into this morally gray area. They didn't understand their identities. They were in conflict with one another. And so we wanted to use a location where civilians wouldn't be running away while they were fighting each other. We didn't feel like they could recover from that, so we chose an airport tarmac," end quote. So what do you think about this explanation to that? And actually, do you find it a negative for that particular movie, that it does feel more muted and devoid of color and gray?
This doesn't make sense for multiple reasons. So the Civil War was the last Marvel movie that I ever watched until Endgame came out, or Infinity War came out. I watched Infinity War, and then I skipped Endgame, and I've never watched another Marvel movie since. So it was Civil War. I skipped everything. Yeah, Civil War. I skipped everything. Infinity War, and then I didn't watch anything after that. So I did see Civil War, and from what I understand of that scene is that they were on their way to the airport as a method of they were trying to travel somewhere, so they had to get to the airport.
Yeah.
Airport. There's a lot of reasons why they probably chose the airport. Probably because it was the only kind of wide open place where you can easily display all those characters in a straightforward fashion. The most unlikely situation for them choosing an airport is that they want gray. Like, that is ridiculous. And if they really wanted to like do this whole morally gray situation, it wasn't like the characters became morally gray the moment that they started fighting each other in that moment. Like they could have started using more gray tones in the film as that moment came, and then the entire rest of the movie could have been gray. If they really wanted to do this whole auteur thing, if they really wanted to play this auteur card, it could have been more obvious.
Which they've even said they're not auteur directors. So this whole thing is bullshit from them.
Yeah, it's like they don't use color theory ever in their movies like that. So the fact that they're going to use it on this one particular scene in this one particular movie, they don't ever use color theory like this again in any other real way in the same movie or in any other movies that they do. It's complete rubbish. Like, it's so cringe. And I really tried to extend a olive branch to these guys because they actually made a TV show it was based on Rick Mender's Deadly Class. It was on Sci-Fi. It got canceled after a season, but I really enjoyed it. Right. So, okay, I like their work. I like their work. And when The Gray Man came out, I saw the trailer. It looked okay. So I thought, okay, they're trying to start making movies and TV shows outside of Marvel, and they want to do their own thing. And I'm like, okay, I appreciate that. I even support it a little bit. But like, this is just so stupid. This is just so ridiculously stupid. Like, when I heard stuff like this, and then I heard them the last time they were talking about the news you're probably talking about was when they were saying that, what were they saying? They were saying like auteurism is like dumb. They were like slamming auteurism or something. I forgot what the last thing they said was.
They were addressing obviously the critique once again that was brought up to them of these amazing directors like Scorsese slamming and calling the MCU juvenile. So that was kind of what they were, that conversation came out of that question.
Yeah. It's just ridiculous. And they're always the ones saying that like, Civil War is based on like The Godfather, or like all these dumb things, like pulling off like, we drew inspiration from this, like constantly just making these dumb comparisons. Like, you've already given up your artistic integrity card a long time ago. You tore it to shreds and you scattered it to the wind. Like, we don't believe you. So yeah, I'm done ranting. It's stupid.
My problem with what they were saying here is, one, yeah, I don't believe them either. I think that they're trying to defend this critique that is very glaring. And I know that this is coming too, because those that know that that we are Zack Snyder fans, but there's a huge difference here that they'll bring up the fact that Zack also uses more muted colors in his pictures, but there's obviously a right and a wrong way to do these things. Like, as we know in the Marvel movies, there's no true black in their shadowing or in their colors or in any of that, whereas Zack does use that correctly. This is why when you compare the two scenes, let's say the airport scene, and choose whatever scene they want, and that's devoid of color in any of Zack's films, one of them looks significantly better than the other, even though they may have the same amount of few colors or saturation. You'll see that there's a correct and an incorrect way to do this.
Colors pop in Snyder's movies.
Yes.
And so it's colorful when it needs to be colorful, and it's less colorful when it's not. Also, lighting is a lot more intentional in pretty much every other movie on the planet. But MCU movies always do like this very evenly lit televisual situation where it makes everything look more straightforward and objective. So it doesn't draw your eye to anything. It kind of lets you take everything in with the same level of importance. It's like anti-cinema. It's
very. Oh yeah, it may, and I think someone said that they have a filter that the studio gives them so that all the movies do have that connected look. so that it all flows. And that's why I forgot which, there's a filmmaker on YouTube or someone who does editing, and he pointed out that all of these films, the MCU ones, do have that mandated non-true black, and that's why you see that washed out look in all of those movies, and
Very
that's why
digital.
it looks terrible in Civil War. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I did also ask on Twitter what you thought about their quote, and at the New Geeks said, quote, "I think it's a cop-out in hindsight that suits this particular movie, but what's the excuse for their other ventures into the MCU?" End quote. And I do think that other MCU movies are a lot more colorful than Civil War, but the Russos themselves, even, I think this was, as you were saying, maybe Winter Soldier, I'd have to go back and actually watch it, but this is still the one that's most obvious, just gray on gray, and in an airport, which they chose the airport supposedly so that there wouldn't be, not movie wise, but so that audience watching, they were afraid that the image of civilians seeing the superheroes fight would be too negative for audiences. So that's why there's no civilians actually seeing them. Actually, I don't know. I don't even know if they fucking fight at all in front of people in that whole movie, now that I think about it.
I feel like I'm going back years arguing about like this movie. It's like this movie doesn't deserve to be talked about, you know? But no, it's totally true. These movies don't typically have like any real stakes for anyone outside of the characters themselves, because the characters' egos are elevated to the most important thing, and any sort of stakes beyond the combatants or their like immediate comic book character counterparts are delegated to just lip service. Like, oh, then if we don't stop this, the entire universe will be destroyed. But there's no real sense of value of the lives of anyone else outside of the superheroes. It's just kind of like always showing them doing heroic deeds or thinking about what they're going to do. And yeah, it's really dumb. And that's why I think that movies like, you know, Man of Steel, BVS, Justice League, where they show collateral damage, where they actually show literally the perspective of, let's say, Metropolis from like the people on the ferry or people on the streets. They do this often, which helps you to realize that it opens up the world, and it makes you get to see what's going on from the perspective of people who don't have the ability to fight back and whatnot. It's not always like the heroes doing this, the heroes doing that every time. I don't know. I feel like we've talked about this before.
Well, the Russos owe a lot to Zack Snyder, because without Zack, they wouldn't have the same plot, Infinity War and Endgame. Without Zack, without BVS, we wouldn't have Civil War, as they have since admitted that that's the reason Civil War exists.
Yeah. It's supposed to be the Serpent Society before.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And without the Death of Superman event, we wouldn't have BVS, at least the same movie. 30 years after the original Death of Superman comic book, DC Comics is going to release an 80-page special which features this event retold from the perspective of different characters that maybe, like you were saying, cannot fight back. So this will feature 4 all-new stories from the teams of Dan Jurgens, so he's returning back from that event to do this one. I like Dan Jurgens. And Brett Breeding, along with Roger Stern and Butch Geis, Louis Simonson and John Bogdanovich, and Jerry Ordway, along with Tom Grumet. And this issue will also introduce a brand new villain named Doombreaker to the DC Universe. So for the collectors out there, there is a first appearance in this one. And some people are saying that it's sort of milking the event, but I mean, Death of Superman itself was a milking of an event as a huge crossover. So
it wasn't even really that good of a comic, in my opinion. And I also don't think that I've read the comic many times, and I've watched I watched like just 2 different animated versions of it. Even there's some video games. There's one called like DC Trinity, where they also had the Death of Superman story in there. BVS had the story in there with the whole Death and Return black suit. Justice League, I think, even did it, the animated series. So I think there's a lot of different takes on it. I mean, I don't know. They try to turn the Death of Superman into this thing, but it's like Superman could die for like a multiple different kinds of reasons, but it always involves Doomsday, usually. And Doomsday isn't really even a character. He's literally just a plot device to kill Superman. And
who they didn't know what he was going to look like. That's why his suit, he's in a suit and it slowly tears off, because from an interview by, I believe, Jurgens, they were saying that they hadn't yet come to an agreement on what that monster was going to look like yet.
Yeah, so I don't really like it. It was always just a big like, oh, you know, we need to sell comics. Let's do something that would shock people. And I don't know. I feel like Superman could honestly they could have done like an event where Superman dies, and it have been more impactful than when it was. Like this was they tried to tie it back. I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole history of the show, but they tried to tie it back to like this monster created on Krypton, so like, you know, Superman was weak to it, and it wasn't something that seemed like it was very well planned out. It was definitely something that was created in the moment to just create this big event where they could sell lots of comics, and it worked. And I don't know, it's kind of cynical to me. I feel like they could have done something much more meaningful, and I think that what Zack Snyder did in BVS was a lot more meaningful. But
whether or not you enjoyed the story, I do agree that it has been iconic for all of these different things that have been inspired by it. Superman being as powerful as he is very vulnerable in many of the stories and many of the comics, but this is probably the most famous vulnerable moment for the character, I think. And yeah, they've done his death like All-Star Superman. As much as I'm not a huge fan of Grant Morrison, they did an amazing animated adaptation of the comic book, and that does his death incredibly well. It celebrates his life.
That's the best version of that Superman, like the most meaningful, the most kind of impactful comic book version that I've seen. So yeah, I like that one a lot, All-Star Superman. But that Superman was just kind of like Batman and was it Infinite Crisis? Like that was good. That was really crazy. That was exciting. But yeah, Death Superman was just like, I didn't like it that much.
Well, again,
they're going to have different versions. They're going to have like different, like, you know, perspectives or whatever. So, hey, they might be able to add meaning to something that had no meaning before by trying to show a different perspective, maybe. So maybe it could be cool. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I do like that they're bringing back some of these old school creators. Like, again, Dan Jurgens, who worked on that original one. Louis Simonson is a comic veteran. So Jerry Ordway, of course, they're at least being careful about who handles this book, as opposed to just, because I know these guys aren't cheap. So they're, instead of just getting this up and coming current roster of talent and say, hey, can you read this old story arc of Death of Superman, reread it, and let's do a story of different perspectives from this event. No, they went back and they got these comic veterans to work on this story. And I thought that was smart of them. And that's the only reason why I will be picking up a copy. It would be neat if they made this a poly bag also, just for the shits and giggles of it, because that's kind of the big gimmick of that original comic. But I will be doing that just for the care that they seem to take, even if this is another, let's make $9.99 or whatever this ends up being. That's all right with me. And I am curious about this new character, Doombreaker. This one is set to release November of this year. Some box office news this week also, as Warner Brothers and The Rock's DC Super Pets has underperformed at the box office with a lackluster $23 million opening weekend against a $90 million budget, not including whatever they spent on advertising. So this is another The Rock and Warner Brothers flop. It continues to follow this pattern that they seem to be going on.
Miserable for a children's animation, you know, miserable.
And they were trying to spinning like #1 at the box office. It's like, yeah, against what?
Yeah.
Top Gun that came out 2 months ago almost.
Nope came out. Nope was a well-made movie, but I don't think that it's a movie that really has a lot of appeal. No. And it is, you know, an R-rated movie, although I don't think it should be, but it is an R-rated movie. So, but yeah, no, this movie definitely should have. It did do better than the rest of its competition, but it didn't do well in any sort of objective sense.
Right. It was also on their Warner Brothers projection for the film, and I think the Rock. I don't know. I still don't think that Black Adam is going to do well, to be honest with you. And I'm not even talking critic wise. I think box office wise, I believe that the studio and The Rock think they have more ticket pool than than he really does. I don't think he's really that much of an attraction bringer when it comes to a solo film starring The Rock. I just don't believe in something like that, and I really don't. I think they're kind of fooled in thinking that Black Adam is going to be this Black Adam DC universe, as The Rock has even called it, this new hierarchy of power, as they keep saying. That's kind of the tagline that they've been told to repeat to bloggers and to news people.
Yeah. I wonder why they chose Black Adam of all characters. It's interesting. And then they want to make him like, he's not that popular of a character. Like people, you know, and honestly, having seen Black Adam in the comics, like I read him in New 52, and that's where I know of him the most. He is quite brutal. He's ridiculously brutal. I mean, he's crazy. This character seems very, very tame compared to what I've seen in the comics, where he's ripping people to shreds and like.
Oh yeah, you can't have The Rock doing that.
Right, and they even played with that, like, oh, you know, Superman doesn't kill people, but I do, or whatever. It's like, yeah, like if punching someone into like the air and he going, you see like a little sparkle in the air counts, then yeah, I guess, yeah, he is. It's like Superman, it's like Batman like knocking someone off into like the water or like top of a building. You don't pan to the person who fell off and then you say, oh yeah, he drowned or whatever. That's what it's like. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't really connect with the audience much. That's basically what, and the character seems to be very played up to be like cool, right, instead of played up to be morally ambiguous. So the tone is still very much like a summer blockbuster movie, where it's not really trying to make you feel as though you should be torn about whether you support him or whether you even like him, you know?
Yeah, and Jeff Johns was involved early on when The Rock was cast years ago, a long time ago. That's kind of been his baby throughout all these years, and that's reflected in his comic books, like Forever Evil. He has churned, and there's even the Shazam solo book. He has changed Black Adam, tweaked them to be, like you were saying, trying to make him more morally ambiguous, as opposed to something like 52, where it was completely different. Now he's about his people and his country, and as long as you guys don't mess with my country, we're not going to have a problem. And he has his own little sense of justice, and he's kinder like than even
like
Sinestro.
He has like a Victor Von Doom kind of thing going on, or even a Namor thing kind of going on. Yeah,
that's what he changed him to, and I think it's because of the movie. I think this was always planned.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in principle, I should be excited about something like this, but I'll say this again. If they just let Zach do his thing and then they allowed this to come sprout off naturally, then I probably would be more likely to give this a chance. But it's just, at this point, I don't care.
Right. And I think the original villain for Suicide Squad 2, and not necessarily David Ayers, because he was going to move on to Gotham City Sirens, but the screenwriter, I believe, revealed that it was Black Adam as the villain that the Suicide Squad were going to try to stop. That was their next mission. Very different, probably more villainous than what this is going to end up being, I would assume, at this point.
Yeah, that would be interesting for sure. I mean, Black Adam is quite formidable. He would destroy the Suicide Squad. I mean, Enchantress, frankly, should have destroyed the Suicide Squad, but that's a whole different discussion.
The last bit of news this week is another big change at Warner Brothers Discovery, as they have acquired the talents of veteran entertainment industry executive Alan Horn. Discovery CEO David Zaslav wrote, quote, "I am thrilled to share with you that Alan Horn, one of the most respected studio executives in the industry, has agreed to assist me in a consulting role during this transition period starting August 1st. No one knows this business better than Alan does. He has had an extraordinary career spanning nearly half a century." End quote. So a little history on Horn and how he's involved in all of this. Horn had previously served as president and chief operating officer for Warner Brothers from 1999 until 2011, where he did help launch numerous blockbuster franchises, including the Dark Knight trilogy and the Harry Potter series. His run with Warner Brothers came to an end when chairman and CEO Jeffrey Bukes forced him into retirement at the age of 68. citing an interest in shifting towards younger talent in leadership positions. He also is responsible for Zack Snyder's 300, which there was a roundtable interview. One of the other executives said that they wish they had not passed on 300 or something like that, and Warner Brothers' Alan Horn picked it up and greenlit it. So what do you think about this as far as what this could mean for future franchises at Warner Brothers Discovery?
I think that amongst all the news that we've gotten of the executive levels of the company changing in one way or the other, this is probably the most objectively positive news that we've heard, because it's someone who's been vetted, who does have a good relationship with Zack Snyder, and it's someone who we know from a previous regime would do right by him if it came to it, or would be more likely to come do right by him, as opposed to just some new guy who, like David Zaslav, like we don't know. We know he's a businessman. They're all businessmen. We really don't know what his personal opinion is on the Snyder situation, or if he has any incentive to bring the Snyderverse back into fruition. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic with this, probably more optimistic than I am with other things, and I do like to see this. So yeah, we'll see how it turns out.
I was surprised by this move too, because Zaslav, as you mentioned, so far hasn't been that executive that's like, well, I'm going to carve my own road and I'm going to make my own success type of thing. We don't need these other things, that we're going to reboot everything again and I'm going to do this right my way. Instead, by him making the decision of going back and getting Alan Horn, he called it a homecoming of sorts, because this is where he belongs, is kind of the feeling I was getting from him, saying this is where we brought him back to. It's smart of him to go back and choose this person, because they do have a lot of success behind them, and obviously David Zaslav wants to try to replicate that or make it even larger with what he has currently. And if aside from someone like Toby Emmerich being a consultant, he brings someone who, fucking Harry Potter, so much goddamn money there, the Dark Knight trilogy and Zack Snyder's films. Obviously, this is someone he should be listening to. And as you said, this is potentially some huge news based on how much David Zaslav takes into account what Alan Horn thinks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that if Zaslav's able to get back Silverman, like imagine he brings Silverman back in some kind of like position. He has Horn, bring back some of that old regime. Bring back Nolan.
Oh, please.
Like let's get Nolan back. I mean, that's something that's more immediate that should be definitely addressed. Then I think that I would start feeling more positively about Zaslav as a leader, because he's making decisions about the franchise that are like, he's recognizing what they did do well in the past, right, and recognizing that that they were positives, as opposed to the previous. Well, I guess you could say the previous regime that didn't really seem to care or react when everything was falling apart, going tits up, So yeah, like I said, I'm definitely positive on this. I think we need to see a lot more things like this happen, and we might be headed in a good direction.
Absolutely. Keep forming that Justice League, David Zaslav. I've got faith. Faith, Millennial Mike, faith. I did ask on Twitter, and at @SilAbdul_Inc. responded saying, quote, Alan Horn seems to be a fan favorite to support #Restore the Snyderverse, seeming to be a fan of Zack Snyder himself, end quote. People have been sharing that image of Alan Horn, Deborah, and Zack together. He obviously likes Zack, and hopefully he can put some influence towards David Zaslav and get the good word out. So
yeah, the only way that I think you could really combat this situation where so many people within the regime and within the industry dislike Zack, I don't think you're going to ever be able to really fix that. I think the thing you're going to be able to do best is to get people who we know do like Zack in there to counteract them. Get as many of the people around Zack that are supportive of him. And that will be, like Nolan was a big part in honestly, if we can get another Zack Snyder movie where Nolan is a producer, like with Man of Steel, that could be great. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that you would like to see Nolan like produce a Snyder movie, or do you think that that only happened in the beginning because Snyder was like kind of new at the time?
Well, I initially thought that he was on because the plans initially were for Man of Steel to be connected to the Nolan verse, and then BVS concept art showed the Nolan Batman fighting against Superman from Man of Steel. So I think the plans were always that it was going to be a part of the Nolan verse still. But as soon as Christian Bale decided that he no longer wanted to do the role, that's when they took that opportunity to cast Ben Affleck and also change the character to, yes, he's still an older, weathered Batman, just like Christian Bale's was at the end of The Dark Knight Rises. But now they have the freedom, or at least Zach and the other screenwriters have the freedom to make it closer to The Dark Knight Returns, which is what I feel like they really wanted to do. And they succeeded in that, having it really heavily inspired by it. But I think having Chris Nolan on board regardless would be a good idea, because Man of Steel is extremely strong, and I would like to see Zach and Nolan work together again in that aspect.
Christian Bale was like, yeah, time to hang up Batman and maybe do some Thor.
What a fucking waste, man. Waste of talent.
Oh my goodness, what an absolute joke, man.
Every time, and I forgot who pointed out to me, they're like, hey, Batman's going to be in Thor. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. They're not going to know how to use them. They don't know how to use any of the actors that they get that are actually legitimately good actors. Like Matt Damon ends up being a fucking joke in Ragnarok also. So there goes that. They're never going to use him. Imagine Jared Leto showing up in the fucking MCU.
Yeah. So I forgot Matt Damon was, oh my God. It's eclipsed by the MCU. Like the MCU is bigger than any director. It's bigger than any actor, because everyone will watch an MCU movie despite anyone who's a part of it. Like even Raimi, like it didn't matter. Like people watched it because it was an MCU movie. It's like even he was eclipsed by it. Like he was not going to be remembered for making a Doctor Strange movie.
No. When his obituary happens, it'll be Evil Dead and Spider-Man. Those are going to be the two, unless he blows us away with something else in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I would like to see that, but...
Me too. But that does wrap it up for our news this week. Now we head into the final portion of today's episode. It is the Broket Block, what Millennial Mike and I have been doing since you last heard us. So Millennial Mike, I know you've been doing some stuff for the Exiles Network podcast, the Ronin console with Scott, but otherwise, what's been going on with you and the podcast as well?
This morning, actually, I recorded with Bobby and another guest named Sharon, who you guys are going to hear once I release the latest episode of the Exiles Network. We were talking about season 4 of Stranger Things, which is kind of late.
Yes, finally, though.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about Stranger Things for sure, because I have a lot of things to say about it.
I was annoying the shit out of you on Discord.
Yeah. No, you were definitely encouraging some more talk about Stranger Things. I'm working on a project right now, which will be happening on the Exiles Network, where it's going to be an essay, and then I'm also going to work on a video essay as well that's going to spawn off of that, where I am going to kind of create like a thesis for the entire Stranger Things show up to this point, and I'm going to discuss basically that thesis on the video essay. Of course, that's what an essay is all about, but it's going to be quite comprehensive, and I want to attack the show from the standpoint of the kind of creative decisions that the Duffers approached the show with that I think caused the show the most problems. That's kind of what it's going to be about. It's going to be about the Duffer brothers, their lack of they don't like to take any risk with the show. Essentially, they constantly keep on like teasing things and talking about how everything's going to change and how we're going to change the paradigm and how this character could get killed and the stakes are higher than ever and blah, 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 blah. But they don't take any risks with the show narratively. And we've essentially gotten season 1 milked again and again and again in slightly different ways. And now the final season's happening, and we pretty much all feel like we kind of know what's going to happen. So, but this is something that we really should have known from the beginning. So I'm going to do like a comprehensive video essay and written essay where I kind of talk about the creative direction of the show since the beginning and where they could have maybe improved upon it. So that's been exciting. I've been working on that. Did the podcast. Rona Council's happening, and that's going quite regularly as well. So
I can finally, that's going to be awesome to hear, especially with Bobby did not spoil any of the talk. He left it all for me to listen to whenever that episode comes out. And
have you watched the show?
I watched all of season 1, and it's not for me. I wasn't compelled enough from season 1 to continue with season 2.
It's a childish show. Like whenever we're talking about shows, like for instance, Arcane or other things like that, one of your criticisms is usually that there's like no adults and it's not really made for an adult sensibility. That's definitely the case of Stranger Things. Like even the season 4, which they claim is the biggest, baddest, most adult version of it, is still a Saturday morning cartoon in comparison.
Well, my problem with Arcane was that they killed off the only 2 characters I cared about. I'm like, well, what the fuck? It happened with All Mighty too, and My Hero Academia, where I only liked All Might, and then they depowered him completely. And I'm like, well, fuck this. I don't care about these other characters that are clearly the focus of the show.
Well, I mean, if that's your issue with, Arcane, then you don't have to be scared about that happening with Stranger Things. So they don't kill anybody. It's like they make a new character every season that is a fodder character. So that character's whole purpose is basically just to be kind of likable and charismatic, and then they get killed at the end. But they don't have any real narrative weight or connection to the show. So they're just kind of just pointless. Like their whole point is to be killed and then emotionally manipulate the audience. The problem with that is that when that happens every single season for 4 seasons in a row, it's created as a way to artificially create drama in a story where you are determined not to allow anything permanent and bad to happen to your main cast. So that's the reason why it's really there. It's like, oh, this new character, and then they get killed, and then it's like, oh man, that was sad. I like the character, but they were never going to have like a real strong impact on the rest of the cast because their relationship is siloed off to the season that they were brought up in, But if they kept that character around and they had that character really like be involved in the show and have like deep relationships with the rest of the cast, and it feel as though they have like a real purpose. If the character gets killed off, then it really is a tragic, like affecting situation that could potentially shift the paradigm of the show. But yeah, so that's my kind of frustration with it. So yeah, I definitely can't wait it's going to take a while. So don't hold your breath, guys.
on the release of the episode, are you saying, or?
Oh no, just the essay, because I'm gonna have to rewatch the entire show. I'm currently in the middle of season 2, rewatching it again and researching it, editing it, and then of course I have to make the video essay part of it, and it's gonna be quite polished. I want to have, it's gonna be video, music. It's gonna go on YouTube. It's gonna be like probably decently long.
Good.
If so, it's this. Yeah, don't hold your breath, but I'm working on it.
Awesome, very good. Now, Bobby and I we weren't sure, is there another season, still one last season of Stranger Things, or was this second part of it?
Yeah, there is actually another 5th season, which is actually quite a surprise to a lot of people. We didn't think that it was going to go this far, but yeah, they're going to do some kind of this was like Infinity War kind of, although it wasn't even as ballsy as Infinity War was. They're going to do like an in-game kind of situation, and
that'll be the final season.
That will be the final season. Of course, the Duffers they were given a studio by Netflix called Upside Down Studios. I'm not sure if you heard about this. No. And they're going to be working on several projects, including another Death Note adaptation.
Oh, okay. So I knew about all those projects. I didn't know they were given their own studio to do this.
Yeah, all of this is done. As a matter of fact, I posted this tweet and you said you wouldn't read it because you don't like to read.
Too long didn't read. I wanted to hear your rage on your episode of it was just a ploy to get you to encourage you to do the the podcast.
Right. Well, I did a little thread, and actually I recently retweeted it on my Twitter, so you should be able to see it pretty relatively high on my timeline. But basically, they're working on several projects, including a Death Note project, and they basically said in so many words that their new studio is going to focus upon, what did they say? They said something like hope and optimism. Like, here we go. They said, according to the Duffer Brothers, Upside Down Pictures will aim to create the kind of stories that inspired the Duffers growing up. Stories that take place at that beautiful crossroads where the ordinary meets the extraordinary, where a big spectacle coexists with intimate character work, where heart wins out over cynicism. And I'm like, dude, heart winning out over cynicism has no place in a Death Note adaptation. it's like this is not engendering any sort of confidence within me. And if that's how they're also approaching this Stranger Things franchise, I can totally see why they're such pussies, you know?
Love it. That was a little tease, I'm assuming, to your episode with Bobby. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm not happy.
That's great. Man, I like that a lot. But I had some anger in my week too as I read Final Crisis for the first time by Grant Morrison, because that graphic novel showed up in that Thanksgiving picture from Zach last year, right above his storyboard. So obviously something there, some kind of inspiration at least for Justice League 2 and 3 is coming from Final Crisis. Have you ever read that story?
Final Crisis?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. It's quite strange and confusing.
Uh-huh.
But the art's good, and it's the whole Batman getting killed is quite shocking. You know, ultimately, I think he ended up getting actually somehow teleported to Apocalypse, where he later escapes, which I don't understand how that works, because he was basically like fried and turned to like a skeleton. But
so they explain that later. The Omega Beams do one of two things: kill you or send you back in time. Now, when Darkseid sent him back in time, his body swapped with that of, I forgot which other hero or villain. That's why the skeleton, it's not actually Bruce Wayne's skeleton that Superman is holding. And then Bruce was sent back to the arcade. You see him jump throughout time, and the Justice League are trying to stop him from coming back to the modern time because it would cause some kind of ripple in reality or whatever. It would bring about destruction if Bruce is able to make it back in time. And I didn't comprehend the return of Bruce Wayne back then. If I read it today, I probably wouldn't understand it either. Just like I didn't understand Final Crisis. I'm just not smart enough for Grant Morrison. Honestly, that's what the critics say. That people, when people say I don't get Grant Morrison's books, oh well, you just don't understand the symbolism and the research. It's like, I get it. There probably is a ton of research I need to do to understand Grant Morrison's work. But I'm just a comic reader. Like, I'm just trying to read this book.
Identity Crisis was who did that? I forget who did that.
That wasn't Morrison. That's a novel writer. I forget his Brad something, but he did that, and then he did a novel beforehand as well. He came from the book, the world of books, as opposed to comics. Brad Meltzer, I think is his name.
Yeah. No, that one. So Identity Crisis was one of my favorite Crisis, books. I mean, they're all called Crisis. I don't know what the deal with DC and crises are. But
they sell books. Just because you put Crisis in it, people buy them.
I think that honestly, all Crisis books should have something to do with the multiverse. If it doesn't have to do with the multiverse, then it's not a real Crisis event. Although I hate multiverse, honestly. I think multiverse is dumb. Whenever there's a multiversal event, it basically just means they're cleaning house. They're cleaning the roster, and you're never going to make a good story with the multiverse, in my opinion, because it's like there's no real stakes. Like, you could destroy everything and then bring everyone back, and the only reason why anyone who came back did is because they chose. It's like it's such. Yeah. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, I'm not sure if I'm articulating myself, but with a multiversal event, there's no real reason why anything the way that it turns out had to be that particular way, aside from the fact that they just chose that for it to be that way. And that's that. It always gets into that kind of thing when you're doing timey-wimey stuff, or oh, there's multiple versions of the character. You can kill a character 1,000 times, but there'll always be another version of that character that exists somewhere. So everything feels very. The stakes don't really feel that high, actually.
Yeah, and that's something that Dan DiDio, who used to be the head of the DC comic books, he said that every 5 years the comics needed to be flushed. Basically, they needed a reset point because at some point sales stall out and you've pretty much peaked at whatever you're going to sell. And so when you do something like the New 52, it gets new readers in and existing readers try out new titles that maybe they wouldn't have before, and sales spike for a little bit, and you got to maintain that momentum as long as possible before the next 5-year mark. So that's what these crisis events, which I know he's responsible for some of them, are for that. Like you mentioned, to clean up, to have a reset point like the New 52, to undo the multiverse and to bring back the multiverse, because that has happened as well. There was a crisis that got rid of the multiverse, and then there's another crisis that brought it all back. So absolutely, that's the point of them. And it's maybe the George Perez one was good. I haven't read it in a long time. And then the Brad Meltzer Identity Crisis, I did enjoy that. So there are some good ones in there, but like something like Final Crisis, I didn't enjoy. And then recently there's the Dark Multiverse Crisis that's currently going on. It's on like issue 3. And I have no interest in reading that. I don't know if it's any good, but I haven't heard any positive buzz. But that is really literally the point of these crisis books. It's just to find a way to bring back existing characters that haven't been around for years, or to completely have a starting point for the line of books because they've gone too crazy with them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I get the purpose of it. It's just that, yeah, my view of art is it should be kind of protected from the, like, I don't want to be thinking about how they're trying to clean up their portfolio when I'm reading a story. But it's just hard to separate that when you're reading this multiversal event where the multiverse is at stake. It's like, that's too grand of an idea for it to really have any meaning. If there's a multiverse, different versions of every character, then why should you care about any particular character? Like, you know, philosophically speaking, I just can't really get behind that. That's why, I don't know, for me, that's why DC, I think the characters just never, like, from the comic standpoint, really, I never really related to them or really cared that much about them, because one, they're larger than life and they felt a little bit less personal to me, like than Spider-Man or X-Men did, or even like Bruce Banner, Hulk, Fantastic Four. Like, I like those characters a lot. But then you have like these multiversal things, which Marvel has it too, kind of, but it's especially a trope with the DC comics where there's a million different versions of them anyway. So, you know, why does anything really even matter? And I always felt like whenever Peter Parker was dealing with his family and, you know, Aunt May was in the hospital, like, it was serious. Like, this is the only, of course they did that terrible comic book with One More Day, and then they had Jackpot with their, but so it's not like they're completely off the hook, but you know, in general, I've always kind of related more to the Marvel characters.
Outside of that, I am going down my reading list and picking away at it. I'm current on comics, but Final Crisis I wanted to throw in there. And I again, probably the only thing I would assume, especially since Zach hasn't built all of these crazy elements into his previous movies, I don't think they're going to show up in Justice League 2 and 3. But I'm assuming the big image of Batman shooting Darkseid with the Omega Bullet or whatever it was called is the main thing that we're going to see, and him getting, of course, blasted by the Omega beams, which we know happened in at least his initial iteration of Justice League 3. So that's probably what he's pulling from that, and maybe it'll end with, as many speculated, Bruce getting not destroyed by the Omega beams, but thrown back in time to when the history lesson happened of maybe he brings together the different tribes throughout the world.
When did they introduce the idea that Darkseid's Omega beams could throw one back in time?
I think it was because of Grant Morrison in Final Crisis.
Because that's stupid, honestly. Like, I'm sorry. It's so dumb. It's like the Omega beams are always so daunting because they were kind of like this escapable force, and you would kill you, you know. But now it's like, oh, he could choose to throw you back in time, or what? Does Darkseid not choose?
I don't believe he decided to send Bruce back. I don't know what Grant's explanation
was. The beams
was.
have like a mind of their own or something, or
that maybe the universe does, or Anti-Life Equation does, or that's where the Bruce fit in the anti. I don't know. I'm not Grant Morrison. You got to remember, this dude takes hyper or hallucinogens when he writes these fucking stories, and he just puts them out there. None of this is written soberly.
Yeah, it's so stupid. It's so stupid.
So if that ends up being what Zach does, I'm sure he'll have a better explanation for the Omega beams than whatever Grant came up with.
All the gods, sure, you know, the whole like map of his DC universe. Wasn't Bruce supposed to die in the end anyway? Like they could just kill Bruce and just have him be dead. Like
yeah, that might happen. It might just be that he dies and that's it. Yeah. It's just that because of that one screenshot or that one scene in the history lesson where there's one of the writers in Man's World that is sitting in the back, and now that we have it in HD, they're like, that looks like Ben Affleck. Either it's a little cameo or it's an extra that looks a lot like Ben Affleck,
right?
Or it's an Easter egg to Zach's plan of eventually having that Bruce go back in time like in Final Crisis and be stuck in that time period, so pretty much be dead to the current times, but have that experience of, okay, I've put together the Justice League once before, I can do it now in the past.
What you should do is have Bruce and Flash get on the, what is it? The
Cosmic Treadmill?
The Cosmic Treadmill, right? But then something malfunctions or whatever. He flies off the treadmill and gets separated from Barry. And then he ends up, So that's how you would make that interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we know that device was in his original plan. So that's a way to do it.
Yeah.
And Barry accessed it when he spoke to Bruce in BVS. That's a good idea right there, Mike. Good job.
Yeah, see, they need to take our ideas seriously.
Well, Millennial, this has been fun. I'm glad we got some movie news and Snyderverse news sprinkled in there, along with some outrage from Sylvester Stallone. And I know you talked about what's going to be on Ronin Console and on the Exiles Network, but for anyone that hasn't subscribed to those podcasts yet, let them know where they can find it, where they can find you, and a little bit of what each show is about.
Right. So the Exiles Network is going to be our feature podcast where we talk about movie and TV news and more of your mainstream pop culture, movie, video. We do like we've done video game stuff in the past. That's kind of more on the Ronin Council now, which is more about your video games, your anime, and other kind of like weeby and or Japanese kind of adjacent content. So that's what the Ronin Council is all about. You can find us on Twitter at the Exiles Net and at Ronin Council. Also, I created a allmylinks.com/the Exiles Network like account. So you can go to allmylinks.com/the Exiles Network, and it has everything there. It has Instagram, Twitter, patreon.com/the Exiles Network. It's got everything on there, YouTube, and hopefully I'll start to build up some of those other platforms that I'm not working as much on currently, and you can find everything that I'm doing there.
Very good. And there will also be links to everywhere you can find Millennial Mike in the description of today's episode. If you have picked up, I know some of you are in the Discord for us and you know about the Collector's Corner. If you have yourself picked up some TCG, opened up some booster packs, or bought some singles online, and you want to get them graded, head on over to treefroggrading.com. Use the code BROKE to save 5% off your grading. If you haven't seen those yet, they're beautiful slabs. I just put up an unboxing video on the YouTube channel, so you can see them firsthand and check out what they look like and what the grades consist of. In this case, it was Pokemon cards, so check out some cool Pokemon cards on our YouTube and then use the discount code BROKE. But thank you so much for tuning in, whether this was your first episode or episode number 520. I've been Daniel, joined by Millennial Mike, and Broke at Core, all will be well. So is there anything by the Duffers? Are you going to be watching and following them into their new production studios now after what they've done with Stranger Things?
Yeah, I feel as though they have the ability to do interesting things. Netflix has given them a lot of power lately, and I feel like the Duffers are trying to become like a Russo situation. I think that like Stranger Things is such a well-made piece of art that I think that seeing a franchise built around these like strange oddities, like these sort of Twilight Zone kind of stories with strange, extraordinary things like they mentioned in that little quote that I mentioned earlier, could be quite interesting. But they want to like have this sort of like youthful Saturday morning cartoon, like hope and optimism, like positive spin to everything because the world's going to crap and we need to like have positive, like non-cynical story kind of thing. So I don't know. I really want to know what they're gonna do, but I'm a little skeptical. So we'll see.
So it's not done yet. It's not dead yet. Your relationship with them will continue. We may get another outrage podcast in the future based on whether they do good or bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. You know, I hope that they do well, and I want to see more artists get creative control over their work. So the fact that they have their own studio means that they could potentially do something really unique. And I think Netflix, you know, they're working with Zach right now. Like, hopefully they continue to empower their creators. So we'll see. You know.